everybody. Welcome to a presentation on how to make accomplishing things easier. And so when I put it in the story promo, I was talking about perspective hacks that make getting into it or getting back to it easier. And I noted that this is also great for things that you haven't been able to start or stop ever, or for a really long time. So I want to thank you for joining in, and all the feedback that I've been getting on live has been really helpful. So as you know, I'm using this space to practice adding language to some of these more abstract concepts and methodologies that I use in my work and am now making available in different course formats. Hey, Isaac. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully this will be really useful. I've got notes and diagrams, and it should be about 15 to 20 minutes, and we're going to cover the two issues, the two mind traps, and we're also going to cover a 4-step solution. So what's really interesting about this perspective work is that just having it on your radar actually makes a difference in what you do, even if you haven't consciously worked through the material. And so you can expect that by just exposing yourself to this material that things will shift and you don't really have to push that hard. So our objective today is to make accomplishing things easier. And how are we doing that? By making the micro steps that are a part of accomplishing it feel more comfortable. And hey, David. And put on my presentation jacket. All right. Okay, so if you guys are just joining, what we're talking about today is how to make accomplishing things easier by making the micro steps that lead to accomplishing it more comfortable. And how are we doing that? And we're doing it by looking at what's happening in a way that bypasses two major mind traps. And we're gonna call the mind traps resistance so that we stay with the popular lexicon. So let's get started. I want to really emphasize that the thing in the future, or what you're attempting to accomplish or get back into or feel better about, really what you expect to find in the distance is just more peace or comfort in the moment. And so it really is about this momentary feel and not really about the thing. And I think that's really important just to keep in mind as you move through this, because if that is your ultimate objective and not the thing, then it gives you the opportunity to choose this without this. I don't know if that makes sense. So our first mind trap is fear. And when you dissect fear and you ask really what is it, why is it there, it's you're afraid of pain. And I divide pain into two categories. So we've got physical pain or discomfort and psyche pain or discomfort. And the physical pain, particularly with putting yourself back into the pattern of doing things, is am I going to be uncomfortable? Am I going to be tired? Is this going to hurt? Is this going to muscle burn? So we've got the fear of this physical in the future that's shaping our ability to interact with the moment relative to that thing that we're trying to accomplish. With psyche pain, it all kind of boils down to concern of not being good enough, which is really just I'm afraid I'm not going to be loved. So we've got survival on those two levels being threatened. At the psyche level, I'm not going to connect with anyone, I'm not lovable. And at the physical level, oh my God, survival. When you look at the opposite of that, and by opposite I mean what that's not, it really is the sensation of aliveness. So what we're afraid of is losing or detracting away from the sensation of aliveness. And this recognizing that fear plays a role in whether you're doing something or not doing something in the current moment is relative to step one in our when you notice resistance, what can you do protocol. And it's consider, is this a phantom concern? So is my brain trying to protect me? Like, I won't do this thing. It seems like impossible to do this thing because there might be some underlying fear that hasn't been addressed to. So it's kind of like puppeting you around in the background and you're not really even aware that it's there. And so you can just kind of like slow down and ask, you know, is there something I'm afraid of as far as like looking stupid or not being good relative to other people when I do this, or holy fuck, everybody else is doing this and I'm not. Like, is there a psyche survival issue underneath your resistance to take a step? Is there physical fear underneath your resistance to take a step? Are you afraid that you're going to be drained? Do you remember a time that it sucked a lot? You don't want to do it. And both of those are so crazy. Like, when you really like, you're like, all right, fine, let's talk. And you like look at it and work through it, it kind of like dissolves. It is the craziest shit. It's so easy. You just kind of like poke into it and you're like, wait, I was afraid of that. That doesn't even make sense. So if you're joining, what we're talking about today are the ways that you can make accomplishing things easier by making the micro steps that lead up to accomplishing it feel more comfortable, by looking at what's happening in a way that bypasses mind traps, which are like resistance. So right now we're talking about the two mind traps. We've got the emotional one, which is fear, and fear kind of breaks into psyche fear. Am I going to be lovable? Is somebody going to be with me? And physical fear, is this going to hurt? The second one is a mental mind trap, and right now there are a ton, but I think the most relevant one right now is concepts. And this is so cool. Let's say that you look at cooking and you're like, okay, when I'm cooking, there is like, I'm standing at the stove. However, if you broaden that concept, it could also include the time that you were at the grocery store. And if you broaden it further, it can include the contemplation before that. If you broaden it even more, it could include the last time that you cooked and the information that you got. And so really, we've got these concepts that are like, oh, when I'm in this time and space, when I'm making this motion with my hands, I'm doing the thing. But you could very well broaden that in a way that makes what you're doing or you're not doing fit the thing that you think you should. So exercise and nutrition are really easy examples, but we could also look at this for productivity. So I work with a lot of people who are really smart and they have high expectations for themselves about being productive and contributing to society. And whenever they're not producing, things aren't like flowing out of them, it seems like something is wrong. But there are periods of time when things are gathering or synthesizing or integrating that precede productivity. And if you discount them, then you may identify with not being productive or not doing something, which puts you in an uncomfortable mental state, which really takes away from your ability to do or enjoy anything. So right now we're talking about mental concepts that could be causing resistance and stepping into some activities that would lead to accomplishing the things you want. And we've talked about fear, and now we're talking about which is an emotional mind trap, and now we're talking about a mental mind trap of concepts. And I just introduced the idea that the definitions that you have might be holding you apart from a thing that you think you could or should be doing and you actually are, but just your definition is too short. I think this is also really relevant when we look at relationships. So I work with a lot of people around stepping into love or opening to love again, and it's easy to say like, I'm not in a relationship, but what about the pieces that are before that make that possible or healthy? So there are ways that you can kind of like angle yourself that reduce maybe like the internal like battery of like, I'm not doing it right, this isn't right. The next one is language, and I use this a lot with clients. It's trippy as fuck when you start to tweak language and see how that impacts what you do or you don't do. For example, I was doing P90X this morning, and it's talking about the next, like he puts the headers on the bottom, and so it's like the next exercise was Slater squat. I was like, what the hell is this? And he like walks us through it and does it. It's a burpee. he just is calling it something. And so that little shift, like if somebody sees burpee on the screen, they'd be like, oh my God, like I'm done, I don't want to do this. But they're like, oh, Slater squat, all right. And you start to walk through it, and then you're doing it and you're like, oh. So if there's something that you find that you just can't get yourself to do, the language that you have around it might just be too unwieldy or too uncomfortable or just too much. So call it something like silly and soft. It could be something really simple, as I worked with someone who had an adverse relationship to exercise. We changed the word exercise to movement, and lo and behold, it's a very important and beautiful part of her life now. So there are just ways that you can angle things and structures inside of you to support what it is you really want to do. And it's not cheating, it's just like recognizing what the mind can and can't do. So the next thing we'll talk about is this concept. So I don't know if you can see it. So I try to draw it dark enough so that, look, hold on, let me outline it. Because we're on backwards. Okay, so this is my graph of time and space, and you can kind of use this when you notice that you are uncomfortable in this present moment, the intersection of time and space. And you can ask, like, am I thinking about the future? Am I thinking about the past? Am I thinking about myself relative to other people? Am I thinking about other people relative to myself? And anytime you pull yourself out of the center, you basically take away your investment power. So I think of attention sort of like coins. And if your coins are in these other quadrants outside of the center, you're not going to get a return on investment because you can't really do shit with any of those things. It's a kind of like, I don't know how we end up spending all this time in these other places thinking that it does something, but it really doesn't. So when you notice that your mind is in one of these places, ask if that's a good return on your investment. And you might have a little bit of a vacuum because you're like, if I'm not thinking about those things, what am I thinking about? And the ultimate objective of most spiritual practices is nothing. And you're like, yeah, but I'm a this, I'm a that. Well, it's really interesting when you look at the limitations of thought and the value and really what it gives you. And if you're not sure if this is right or true for you, really spend some time and think about it. Okay, when I am when my mind is sitting in the past or the future or considering what other people are thinking or doing excessively, what am I getting? And just bringing that into your awareness could be enough to kind of quit the habit. So if you're joining now or would like a summary, what we're talking about today are ways, it's a 4-step action plan. I'm introducing a 4-step action plan to make accomplishing things easier, and particularly thinking about maybe some habits or activities that you've been removed from because of quarantine or lack of resources, or maybe these are things you've never been able to do or stop doing before. So we're talking about how to make those easier with a 4-step action plan, and we're doing it by looking at how to make the micro steps that lead to those accomplishments more comfortable, and we're doing that by looking at what's happening in your mind that might be causing resistance or standing in your way between you and taking that tiny little action. So we talked about the 2 traps, and I divided them into emotional and mental. And in the emotional trap, we've got fear, and that kind of dovetails into fear of pain of psyche nature and fear of pain of a physical nature. And that might cause this phantom resistance. Hey, Bernie. This phantom resistance where there really needn't be any. And I suggested that whenever you notice that you're not taking a step, rather than trying to really force the step, if you can relax back a little and say I wonder if I'm afraid of something that's not real. And you can kind of just ask yourself, go through a dialogue. Well, why aren't I doing it? Well, what am I afraid of? What is it? You might find that the thing that had been standing in your way is kind of just you can just and it's gone, which sounds really simple. And maybe you've already experienced this, maybe you haven't. But the psyche discomfort is usually around not being sure that you'll feel like you're worthy of love. And it can be kind of uncomfortable to get to that level of acceptance of self. It might actually come across first as an emotion that's like anger or depression. So I've worked with a client before, and like just a brilliant, beautiful woman, and she noticed that she would get really angry at her partners. She had a series of boyfriends, and she'd get really angry, and she would express towards them and think that, oh, if I yell at them and he sees how mad I am, that will change his behavior. But when you really dig under it, what she was afraid of was being vulnerable. She missed him, or she was concerned that it wasn't going to work. Like there was a really soft, delicate emotion underneath that anger that just hadn't been allowed for in her awareness. So just kind of having these conversations with yourself around what are you afraid of can make those steps more comfortable or more accessible. I talked about physical pain, and this is kind of interesting because it's largely phantom. If you have, let's say, a book that you're working on, or a course that you're developing, or a project at work, or some kind of house chore that you've been putting off, in your mind it might be organized as physically draining, and so you could be intentionally or unintentionally withholding action from that activity because you anticipate that moving through the activity will make you feel exhausted or physically uncomfortable. You get tired, you're like, oh, but that might not be true. And with that, I recommend sort of like the dive in strategy, where it's like, let's just see. And I'm going to talk about the we'll see box in a minute after I move through this recap. So that is the emotional category of mind traps. And in the mental category, so like I said, there are a ton of mental like ninja maneuvers you can do to make yourself take an action. But the ones that I talked about today are lines and language. And so lines are when you look at doing a thing, is it just that thing? So I use the example of cooking. We call cooking this, but cooking could also be going to the grocery store. It could also be thinking about what you're going to do at the grocery store. It could also be the experience that you had before you decided what you were. So there are ways, like, let's say what you're trying to implement is exercise, or let's use a pot. Let's say like what you're trying to do is update your internal language so that it's more supportive of intimacy. And so you might notice that you're holding yourself apart from being connected to people, and you've got a lot of judgment on yourself. You're like, come on, bro, like, let's go. Like, you want this, let's go, but you can't do it. If you broaden the concept beyond whether or not you are taking the action you think you should be taking, you could see that it is all funneling towards that. That's why whenever people talk about falling off the wagon, I'm like, psst, there is no wagon, or like, psst, it's a big ass wagon, because all of that contributes, all of that information contributes to you moving forward if you let it. It is only the mind that's like, no, this is wrong. The other one we looked at, mental concepts, was language. And I used the example of a client where she had resistance to exercise. But when we started calling it movement and we put that on our radar, somehow it's okay. And it seems like a really simple shift, but it can be, because language is so powerful. And if what you have connected to eating healthy or work is uncomfortable, if you call work something like silly and sexy, somehow it's like, oh, I don't have this project to do, I have this mission to accomplish. And Tony Robbins is a big proponent of language shifting, and it's true. If you haven't looked at language before, Neuro-Linguistic Programming is a great resource. Richard Bandler is one of the, I want to say he's the founder. He's like he's like towards the top of that. And he's got some really great ideas on how to organize your mind relative to language to make doing what you want to do more accessible. So after that, we talked about this. And this is my time and space graph. And what I was introducing was, at this intersection of here and now, this is sort of your only place of power. When we think about our focus or our attention as coins, you can only invest coins here in a way that you get a return. If you're thinking about the past, the future, how other people, you relative to other people, or other people relative to you aren't getting shit on your coins. Shit. So it's almost like giving yourself the collapse, like the freedom to kind of collapse your attention to what's happening right now, where you can actually affect the quality of your life going forward. Alex, I see your questions, but I'm gonna keep going and I'm gonna roll back to them. Okay, so the next thing, so this is, now we're at the action plan. So let's say that you have resistance to taking steps towards something that you know you want to accomplish. Now we've got our 4-step action plan. And what is resistance? Basically, it means that you've got this thing you want to do and you're not. And you could go into like this huge epistemology, this backstory, this like Sherlock discovery of how, why, blah, 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 blah. Or you can kind of like step into it. And the way that you would step into it is, one, consider if the resistance, so rather than like trying to like push or force yourself into that thing, if you step back and relax and say like, what information is here for me that I haven't considered yet? And look if there are any phantom physical or psyche fears lingering that all you really need to do are like touch into, and then they're gone. So you could do that by just saying like, you're like, all right, self, look, I notice you're still having 6 cookies a day. Let's talk about it. And you say, you're like, okay, well, what's really going on here? Well, actually we'll follow the whole way. Sugar is an interesting one. There are some things that override even like the best brains, and sugar is one of them. This is a great segue back. So when we look at the concepts, measuring progress is a concept that you can really play with in a way that's supportive. So if you're having 6 cookies a day and you're like, look, I know sugar's not bad for me, sugar's not good for me. I need to stop this shit. I want to stop now. Going from 6 cookies a day, especially when it's something as addictive as sugar, to 0 is like impossible. It's pretty hard. So what you could do is broaden success. So 6 times 30, that's 180 cookies a month. Maybe you're measuring success on a month scale now. So maybe you're like, look, I only had 178 cookies this month. And oh, look, 176 the next. And oh, fuck, I'm back to 179 the next month. That's just the way it is. And all of this, every strategy, everything we're ever talking about are just ways to trust, to relax the mind away, to trust what's happening, and relax the mind away from trying to fight or survive what's occurring. So just to recap what I talked about, there was expanding the concept of progress to include a spectrum. Like I had this one client and she wanted to exercise, and she's like, oh man, like I was doing so good. I was going every day, but I haven't gone for like 4 days and blah, blah. I was like, yeah, but when you compare your bi-weekly schedule, your number per 2 weeks is so much higher than before. Like it's not that you aren't, just because you're not going every day doesn't mean you aren't progressing forward. And there are just different ways to like zoom out and zoom in to alleviate some of that mental resistance so that you can let yourself naturally grow towards the things that feel good to you. Good job, Isaac. That's impressive. I'm not a 1 cookie girl. The next part is end the dialogue. So we're talking about the 4 action steps, and the first is to consider if there's a phantom issue here. So is it just the way that it's organized in your mind around fear of not being good enough or fear of being physically uncomfortable? And the next step is to end dialogue. So when you've got like the cookie example or an exercise and you're like, I can't fucking exercise, like, or I love emotional boundaries. It's like, I can't not, I keep bending to let this person lead when, when you keep talking about the problem, you will keep having a problem to talk about. And it's not saying like, don't express when you are constructively working through it. But if it is all you are thinking about in any way, shape, or form, you will not drop it. It will continue to be a problem. And this ties back to almost every self-development guru go-to message. Like, if you think about it, it is a problem. And so what can you do instead? You can't say don't think about it. That doesn't work. And then you have another problem because you're like, I can't stop not thinking about it. And then that's your problem. So it's almost like you want to bait and switch, where you're like, look over here. Hey, did you see this? And that this over here could be a mantra that you repeat. God is but love, and therefore so am I. God is but love, therefore so am I. I love me. Everything's always working out for me. And you just do that until you forget that there was something, you go on to something else. I think of like kids in a grocery store. If you're like, you can't buy this. I want to buy it. I can't. Blah, 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 blah. And like it goes on and on and on. But if you're like, hey, look over here, then this like falls off. It's called scientific prayer, actually, that whole concept, or the best way I've seen it presented. And there is a book or several books by Emmett Fox that go deeper into that concept, if that's something you want to do. But like I said, pretty much every self-development thinker has concluded that, like what you focus on, you get. Napoleon Hill has some great stuff on that, and so does Tony Robbins. I love his stuff, but he comes at it from he's really sneaky about it. He's like, you gotta make your goal big and sexy, blah, blah, blah. And it really works. So it's just focusing on what you want, not on what you don't. Focus on what you want. And if you can't focus on what you want, or you don't know what that is, anything but this, anything but what you don't want. The next step here, so we're on the 4 action steps to notice when you notice you have resistance, meaning like you're not taking the step forward that you want. And the first is to consider if there's a phantom issue, either around the fear of psychological or physical discomfort. The second one is end dialogue, try a mantra. The third one is center into a hot spot or dress for the job that you want. And this is kind of fun. And here I'm asking you to step outside of your body and really visualize the end goal. So if what you're trying to do is pull yourself together and write that book, or quit that job and do this, or get that relationship, like, if you can, start to visualize what it would feel like, who you would be, how life would fit you if that had already been, and walk around in it. So you want to imagine that's already done, and you kind of bask in that. And by that, you might even be able to notice when you have a lot of energy concentrated up top. Usually the biggest clue is you're thinking a lot. But you might also be able over time to or if you're energy sensitive already, just kind of feel extra intensity here. And in this exercise, what I'm asking you to do is bring it down into your body. And this is, if you subscribe to Tesla's work or Einstein or law of attraction, this is about vibration. And in that, you are beginning to vibrate to match the end goal rather than fixate on the issue or the resistance. The final step in this action plan is to create we'll see time and space blocks. And I'm suggesting calling them something cute or funny, like house parties. And what is a I should have picked a better word there. We'll see time and space box. Basically, it's a place for you to do or not do the thing that you're trying to do. So let's say what you want to do is start yoga. You could create a time and space block or box every day or once a week for 15 minutes. And in that time and space box, whatever you do or you don't do is okay. And if you have that time and space box blocked off every week or every day or whatever, eventually you'll do something in it. It's incredible. Think of planting a seed. Eventually it will sprout. And so maybe in the first box, all you do is play with your phone. And in the next box, you're like, last time I played with my phone. You are to have zero resistance to whatever you do or you don't do during the box, the time and space box. So if all you do that time is just like, maybe you don't do any yoga at all, that's fine. Next box, maybe you'll do maybe you'll lift your chin around. This works. I cannot tell you enough that this works, but you need to make the box small enough that you don't have resistance. And when you're in the box, do not judge anything. You can iterate your box, but whatever you're doing in the box at that time is perfect. So let's say you have a computer project you're working on, or a course you want to put together, or something you're studying or whatever. That works too. So like you sit in front of your computer and you're like, oh fuck. In that box, all I did today was look at Facebook. And the next time you're like, yeah, I can do, like, when you have no resistance, it is incredible. People will gravitate towards what's good for them because that's ultimately what feels best, but we lose that connection when we start like bullying us internally. So let your we'll see time and space box be a place where we'll see what you do or you don't do. So if you, let's recap. That's everything I've got today. So right now, if you want to exit, you can, but I'm just going to run back through what we talked about today. And so our objective was to talk about how to make accomplishing things easier and how to do that by making the micro steps that lead to accomplishment feel more comfortable. And we did that by looking at what's happening in the mind that might be causing resistance or difficulty to taking that little micro step. And I identified 2 categories of mind traps or resistance. We've got emotional, which is usually rooted in fear, and fear could be of a psychological nature. I'm not good enough. I won't be worthy of love. Or a physical nature. This is going to be uncomfortable. Or the second category of mind traps is mental. And I talked about concepts today, although there are a ton here. And within concepts, I broke it apart into lines. How are you defining what's happening? Are you saying like, I'm not being productive because I'm not writing the book that's been within me. I'm not being productive because I'm not making 7 figures. I'm not being productive because of this. And broadening what you're looking at. It's so crazy when you really look at, it's like I look like a separate entity, but really it's just kind of like the hand, like it's not solid, you know? And it's the same thing with concepts. We put them around things for convenience, but they're not really things. And so if the concept that you have is saying, I'm not doing this, let's say like this is what you want to be doing and you're over here, broaden your concept until it includes what you're doing so that you identify with doing the thing, which will reduce the mental, emotional tension that you feel, which makes it more likely for you to do the thing. So what's really cool about all this mind stuff is really, they are just tricks. Everything is just a trick to have the mind relax and trust the natural thing that's happening or unfolding. The other mental concept or cause of resistance that we talked about today was language. If you've got a bad connection or a thick history with something, and that like word, it's almost like if somebody think of it more relative to place. So if you went somewhere and you were like assaulted, you would associate assaulting being like fear with this place. We have that same thing with words. And so if the words that you're using don't feel comfortable to you, for example, like exercise, I'm like, maybe you have a shit relationship with exercise. If you keep calling it exercise, it's going to make it harder to do it. But if you call it movement or physical exploration or like, I don't know, something cute or silly, it makes it easier to do it. It's crazy, but the mind really is like this maze that you've got to learn to kind of get past if it's created in a way that doesn't serve or support you. I talked about this, and this basically is recognizing that your focus or your attention can have a return on investment, or you can just be like throwing it up in the wind. And if you have thoughts that are concentrated in the past or the future, or you relative to other people or other people relative to you, you're not investing them in anything that's going to give back. All you've really got is what you're doing right here. Does this feel good? Does this lead somewhere? Right here. It doesn't matter what you're doing relative to anybody else. It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing relative to you. It doesn't matter 7 years ago if you were the boss at this, or 6 years from now you might not have anything. It's like, what can I do right here? So this is just saying, like, when you notice that you are outside of the here and now, to kind of like pull yourself back in without judgment. Always call it cute. Oh, how cute. I'm in the future again. Psst, come home, like, psst, we're over here. We're right here. We're right here. This is one of my favorite tricks whenever I'm excited, emotionally, or fearful. Like, wait, we're right here. We're right here. We're right here. Just do it until you get, like, right here, where everything's probably okay. So those were the, like, sort of like the background information or things to consider that might open up your mind to see other choices. And the last part are the 4 action steps. When you notice you have resistance, meaning you're not taking a step towards the direction that you want. And the first is to consider if you have a phantom fear that's causing some kind of mental roadblock or mental mind trap. The second part is to end dialogue, meaning don't talk about it in your head. The more that you talk about or figure about or rationalize or whatever, then you are reinforcing the existence of a problem. This is quantum mechanics stuff. And I mean, do your own research, but I suggest an experiment of like 2 weeks where you've got like this thing that had been a problem, and every time you think about the thing instead, or you notice you're thinking about the thing, pull it to something else, and after 2 weeks, see what happens. The last one is center into a hotspot or just for the job you want. So what you can do is practice with feeling out what it would be like if you had accomplished the thing. So it's kind of crazy. All the things that I'm talking about are really like path clearing, and none of it is like force. This is never force, and will may work for some people in some scenarios, but for the general population or areas that have been sticky or impossible before, like force does not work. Pave the path. So in dressing for the job that you want, you just kind of feel out vibration, like, okay, like let's say I'm in that relationship. Let's say that I'm in that body. Let's say I have that money. I never have to worry anything. What does that feel like? Where does that feel like? What would I think about? How do I breathe? And the last part is to try to plant we'll see time and space blocks on your calendar so that you can experiment or grow naturally into the thing that you're trying to do. So in that time and space block, which is, I recommend really short ones, like 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 10 minutes at most, we'll see what you do. So if you are trying to take up guitar, if you are trying to apply for a loan, if you are trying to stop smoking, if you smoke every 5 minutes, like we'll see, like in this block of time, you just notice, oh, I showed up and all I did today was go on Facebook. Oh, I showed up today and I did like half of this, half of that. It doesn't matter. Over time, eventually, what will happen in those time and space blocks is what you need or want to develop in your best way. And I'm recommending calling them house parties. So put them on your calendar as house parties, and you'll just see. We'll see what we do. We'll see what I do. I sit in front of my computer for 10 minutes to work on my book, and all I did was like text my friend. Okay, let's see what happens in the next time and space block. All right, so I'm going to run back through your questions. Okay, so, but what happens when you have to make plans for the future? That's a great question. And I think one thing that can be helpful, so kind of like the inverse of concepts being unhelpful, is to deploy them in a way that they are. So you could say like, okay, I need to plan for the future. I'm going to set a time and space block for 10 minutes and I'm going to think about that only. And then whenever that's closed, when you notice that your mind's going, you can jot notes down to revisit next time that you're in that time and space block, or you can just set the intention that it'll all roll forward. if you are a highly energetic person, and this is kind of like on the trippier side, you can set your mind to like deliver stuff. So with a lot of the presentations or the work that I do, I'll be like, okay, at this time, I want to deliver this information. And I just kind of like, I think of like a rain cloud. So it's like I let my rain cloud build and then I like work through it. So you could set your intention that at 5 p.m. tomorrow, you are going to plan for the future and you're going to work out in 20 minutes, whatever you do or you don't do. You're just going to think on that or contribute to that. And then you can do that other times. That way you close off your mind from thinking about it when it's not constructive. Yeah, so kind of like with Isaac, what Isaac is saying too, the feelings are sort of like the biggest. It's trippy. With the feelings, it's like, this I would say like, the helpful doctrine is like my favorite thing ever. And it's like, is this helpful or not? And so it doesn't really matter if it is true or right in somebody else's protocol or according to somebody else's thing. It's just like, is this helpful for me? And so if you find that thinking about something all the time is helpful for you, then the doctrine applies, like do it. But if you find that it's not helpful, even though it's supposed to be, like don't. So with emotions coming up around planning, yeah, it's just like, it's stay in the present. I don't know. I don't think I've tied that back yet. Isaac, if you have something else you want to say on that, maybe you can help me ground that. Let's see. The other stuff was, LOL, yoga. There was one. Did words to or separate? Alex, when you said, if you're still there, did are words separated from your inside? Can you tell me more what you mean by that? I don't think I'm following. And the other thing. Okay, so it sounds like in your one comment you're saying about what, like you want to have a girlfriend but not. I'm not sure I follow that exactly, but that's a really interesting thing too. So let's say that there's something that you really want to happen and it's not happening. Rather than taking it personally, ask for more information. So let's say what you think should be happening but is not happening is you're not getting a new job or you're not getting a relationship. Rather than try to force yourself into that, if you zoom out and say like, okay, well, what other things here? You might have conflicts inside that are like, if you've had a relationship before that didn't allow for your full expression, you might not connect that with your happiness. And so you're like, I want this thing, but deeply you're concerned that that will take away from your overall well-being. And it could be the same thing with a job. You're like, oh, I really want this new position, but a deeper part of you might be concerned that you won't be able to cut it, or it will be too demanding and take away from your personal life. And so it's almost like when something isn't happening, rather than that being like the issue, like allow yourself to kind of like sit back and zoom out or zoom in and gather more information. If you guys are just joining, what we were talking about today is how to make things, accomplishing things easier by making the micro steps towards accomplishing them more comfortable by looking at what's happening in a way that bypasses the mind traps of fear, and which is an emotional mind trap, and the mind, which would be mental concepts. Yeah, I'm with you, Isaac. I think, yes. And that, I think, if you guys are reading the comments, I'm responding to what Isaac was saying about emotions can kind of like pull you from your path, and really they're just like phantom, and it's the trippiest shit in the world. But when you do that exercise of saying like, okay, what else might be here, and you zoom out, you can like press into things. Like they're almost like those math games where it's like you have to quick type the thing to like pop the bubble. If you can like type the thing around the fear, it's like, oh, really? That doesn't make sense. Where the fuck did I get that? And I'm not quite sure how these actually play a role in neuroscience or the way like our actual decision-making framework goes, but they're very like, they're just shadows. You turn the light on and it's like, oh, I can manage that. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining, for your participation. This was really helpful for me in practicing. I hope it was helpful for you as well. I am intending to put this up on YouTube. So if you missed it or you want to send it, the entirety, or you missed it or you want to send it to your friend, please do. If there are any topics that I haven't covered yet that are of interest to you, I'm definitely interested in that. If you want to stick around now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it would be like. Oh, thanks, Jackie. Thanks, love you, bye. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it would be like if you needed to pull in or wanted to pull in somebody else to work on some of this stuff with you. So I'd say like, and this is where I'm trying to really nail, thanks, friend, the habit book offering, because it's not just spreadsheets, it's not habits of action, it's not just about like doing glute bridges. There's like this whole context, this whole environment that is expanded so that you can retool your relationship to different concepts. And it's never about doing the thing to get the thing. It's really just around reorganizing the mind to support you feeling comfortable and confident to live your life. So what I found, and this kind of corroborates with some other people, is that what we actually want and what we're really after is the sensation of aliveness. And what is that? It's just like you're not thinking, you're just being, you're doing. It's kind of like that running all out feeling where it's like you are like, like the wind blowing through your hair. And that's kind of like what, or maybe to you that's more of like this rooted peace that you feel next to someone. But there's like this aliveness, this sensation of being here that we're really all after. And when we have a lot of internal anxiety, it's often because we have separated the source of that from being inside to being outside and thinking that we need to do something or be something to get it, when really the access point is inside. And so the work that I do around habits, they're really just habits of focus and habits of thought that translate to habits of action, and the habits of action then translate to a new reality or a new experience or a new body or a new relationship or whatever. But they're really just habits of thought, habits of feeling, habits of perspective that allow for new actions. I'd say like it's really important to consider, if you haven't worked with someone before, what value that might bring to you. So I have like a staff of 4 or 5 people that I call on when I kind of like hit the edge of my mind. And I think the best example is that of like sunglasses. It's like, or glasses. You use your glasses to look at the world. You use your glasses to even look at your internal processes inside, but you can't see your glasses because that's what you're using. And so if you find that you have taken something as far as you can and you just can't get past it, it might be time to have somebody come in and help you look at what you're doing with your glasses, or what's there that you need, or what you might want to take away. And that was a really big transition for me, being oriented towards being like, I'm a very strong, I'll figure it out, like I'll do it myself. But I really had to like allow myself to be like, wait, hold up, like this is like the same shit, like what the fuck? And I'm putting together a webinar that might be of use to you if this stuff was interesting, about those subconscious blocks. And 2 of the biggest ones I've found for people who are really smart, if your mind is really well developed, it's like kind of like a blessing and a curse. And unless you know the pitfalls of it and the way around it, you might be hampering your ability to develop some things because you're so smart. When you know so much, it kind of like narrows the steps that you think you can take. And in some instances, that's really great and helpful, and some it might not be at all. If you look at something like a relationship, if you've got it narrowed down to like, I know all these things, these are all the ways it can't be, this is the way it has to be, then you make this like really narrow slot for love to come into your life when really love's everywhere. But because your mind has fixated on this one entry point, you kind of miss it. So there's just different things to consider or be aware of when you look at the results that you're driving and what the actual source of those difficulties or those opportunities are. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I don't know when or what I'll present next, but please send feedback or ideas. It's been a pleasure hosting you.